Hello guys, this is Lucas again, and in this video I'm going to show you how to create your first model and write some basic tests for it. In the previous videos we have been talking about the views and the controller. We already used both of them. So now to make it complete we're going to create something that we call model. And in Ruby on Rails, model will be defining our data. So for example, if you have a user, the model would describe what attributes this user have and what special abilities we give to that user. Or whatever other object or whatever other item we may talk about, for example, a message or a post, etc., etc. So in this video I'm going to show you how to create your first model, get it tested, and we'll see what sort of abilities this object or this model will have. So let's go into our terminal. Make sure you're in the folder with your application. Before we start, let's commit this repository. Let's commit to repository. Git commit, git add, git commit, okay, so we to create a model we will use Rails generator. So Rails generate model, and we will generate a model of post, like a blog post. And notice that I'm using the name with capital P, and also it is singular name. The convention of Rails requires us to name our models in a singular format, and the controllers that are matching the models are going to use the plural version of the same word. And make sure that when you pick the name for your model, this name also has a plural form, because if it doesn't, then you may run into all sorts of trouble. Because Rails by the default, it will try to match different elements of our application in using the name. So when we have our post model, then we can build our posts controller to match that model. Okay, we create a post. Let's give it some attributes. So post would probably have content, and the content would be the data type would be text, because it's going to be can be fairly long. Would also have for now it's probably enough. So post would have content. So let's run that and see what our Rails generator create for us. Okay, so there's 3 files that are Rails generated for us. The first one, it's in the folder db migrate. db migrate. And the file has this very, very long name. Now let's close all those files that we don't necessarily need at the moment. Okay, this file we're going to use to create, to change our database, because right now our database is empty. We haven't created any tables inside of our database, and this file is used by Rails to create new tables or to change the existing tables. This particular file will create a table that will have a name posts, and will have only one field, generated by us, what's going to be called content. And Rails will also generate a couple more things. First one is going to be ID, and the other is going to be called created at, and the third one will be updated at. We don't really need to do any work, and Rails will do everything for us. So that's the first file. Let's look at the second file that has been generated. Second file is in our app folder under models, posts.rb. Okay, so this is description of our model. Right now there is nothing inside, but we'll put all the special abilities of our post model. We're going to do it in the next step, so bear with me. The last file is the test file. It's going to sit in our spec folder, in the folder called models. And right now there is only this pending instruction. So pending will make our test produce this yellow warning like reminder. So let's run our spec to see what situation we have now. Our Rails is letting us know that there is some migrations pending, and it even gives us some instructions how to run those migrations. By migrations, I mean the process of updating the database hasn't been completed. Right now we created instruction how to update the database, but we haven't really executed that instruction. And we can do it by typing rake db migrate. And to make sure that we can use the new database also for test, we will run a special migration for the test database. Rake db test prepare. The migration is complete, so let's run our test again. We won't need this file anymore, but don't delete it. Whenever you change your database, you should generate new migration file. So, and if you delete any migration files from this folder, even if they're old, even if you think you may not need them, be very, very careful. And unless you know what you're doing, don't do it. Okay, just leave them there. Okay. Our old tests are passing, but there is this new thing, this star. It says that there is some pending tests, the tests that haven't been defined yet. But Ruby on Rails will remind us that we should write those tests in order to make sure that our application is well tested. So let's run our first test. Let's write our first test for this model. And we can do it exactly the same way as we did before for our view tests. Describe. Before we do that, let's make sure that we have something to test. And we can do it by typing before. And let's create our model. Let's create our first post. And we can use it instance variable to save it into that variable. And we'll create new post. Post new. Okay, and make sure that when you type it, your case is correct. So we're now going to run this new command or new method on the class post. So let's give it a content and just not very verbose content. And let's set the subject of all our tests to that post. So when we refer to the post in the test below, we can just say it. It should this, it should do that. And we can probably write it here. It should respond to content. Okay, and save that, run our test, and the test is now passing. Wonderful. At this point, we can already interact with our database. We haven't really done much, but our database is already prepared, so we can create posts and save them into the database. If you want to interact with the database and the whole application, you can go to your terminal and write Rails console. And that will open a special console where we can type the commands and use the classes, use the class methods, create variables, and interact with our database. So how about we just type the name of the class and see what Rails will tell us. So let's write the name of the class post. And Rails tells us what post is. The post has an ID, and that's an integer. Post also has content, which would be text. It has this field created at, and that would be a special format called datetime, and updated at, and that's also a datetime. So how about we create new posts and do something about it? So let's use some instance variable, just like we're doing in the test below. Oh, sorry, not user, post equals post new. And let's give it a content, just like in our test. Run that. And Rails created a new object for us. It doesn't have, the ID is now nil. The created at and updated at are also nil, but the content is lorem ipsum. We can already, you can already see that this is valid entry. Until the object is saved to the database, however, the post ID will be nil. And as long as you see nil as ID, you can be sure that the object has never been saved to the database. Right now, this object is in the memory. So let's save it and see how it changes our post. So post.save. And now as our Rails application runs some SQL code for us, and this is right there. There is an SQL code. How cool is that? We don't have to learn any SQL in order to change our database or take some information out of database. And also notice that our updated at and created at already have some values assigned. Okay, let's pull out our post from the database. We can just do it by typing post. This is the this is the name of the variable that we created here when we were creating new post. So this is our variable, and we can call it any way we want. We can call it Chewbacca, it doesn't really matter, as long as the code here is correct. So let's type post and see what it returns. It's a post class, ID number 1, content lorem ipsum, and created and updated at the same time. Let's create another one, shall we? And we can do it without this two-step. We don't have to say post.new, but we can actually go and say post.create, and that will force save when we create it. Say post create, and we don't have to use the variable at the beginning. We can already call it on the method. Oh, sorry, on the class. We can call the method on the class. Post create content new post hello world, close parentheses, and run it. And this time it immediately commit that to a database. Therefore we have now 2 posts, and we can count how many posts we have, and we can run it in the method on the class called count, and we have two posts. Great. So what if, for example, in our application at some point somebody will try to save a post without the content? Well, post without content is useless. It has absolutely no value. So let's make sure that our application will not allow the posts without content to be saved. So at the beginning, let's try to save a post without content. So post create content. Actually, no, let's not run anything. Just post.create. And it did save it. Now we have new post with ID 3, so we know it's saved, but content is nil. That's something that we don't want. So we can write the test that will make sure that that our post will always have content. So let's create new test. Describe when content is not present. Do before at post content equals nil. So we'll assign, previously we created this post and we give it some content, but here we will overwrite it and we replace some content that we created before with nil, and nil is nothing, is 0. Well, 0 is actually something, but nil is nothing. And we would expect, so it, as because we have a subject of a post, we can say it should not be valid. Save that, go back to bash, and run rspec. We expected posts without content to not be valid, but the test is now failing because application allows it to be saved in the database, so it is valid, but we want to make it not valid. In order to do that, we have to go to our post class and added some special ability. And this first ability we call validates content presence true. Now before post will be saved to the database, it will make sure that there is a content. The content is present, so at least something other than nil is being saved. Save that. Oh, sorry, not here. Here, save. And let's run our rspec again and see if this time our application will not allow posts without content to be saved. And the test is now passing, which means that if we try to save posts without content, now the application will not allow it. It will not be valid. So let's go back here and try to run the same command as here. And here you see this worked. And see if now will work or not. Post. Our test told us that it will not work. Oh, sorry, it will work this time because we didn't restart our command or our console. So let's restart our console. Exit Rails C for console, or you can type full name console. Okay, and post new. Oh, sorry. Post create. Oh yeah. Create will try to save it to the database immediately. And this time it didn't work. You see this command rollback transaction. It means that our transaction was not successful. And the result is this post object without an ID. Therefore, we know it hasn't been saved to the database. Alright, that's our validation. Now nobody can save post without a content. So how about what about the situation when the content is, say, very, very short? Maybe it's just one character. We don't want such a short post to be saved to the database. Or maybe in some situation you want that to be allowed, but well, I want each post to be at least 20 characters. So how do I do that? Well, before we do that, let's make sure that we have a test for it. So the test is very easy to write, and then we don't have to do all this manual checking. So let's describe when content is too short. Do before post content equals, and here we can do some Ruby code, say A times 19. And why 19? Well, because 19, if we can multiply this letter by 19, we'll create 19 times A. Actually, I can run it here, because all the code that you see on the bottom, we can actually write in the console. So A times 19 will produce 19 A's long string. Okay, so 19, we want to create an edge scenario. So we want the situation when this is invalid. We want 20 characters to be valid. So 19 characters is the first one that is too short. Okay? So go back here and we would expect this. It should not be valid. So 19 is too short. It should not be valid. 20 is okay. It should be valid. So save that, go back here and run our spec. Great. Right now our test is failing because if we try to save it with the content that is 19 characters, it will still work because application doesn't care how long it is. If it's 1 character or it's 1 million characters, it's still okay. So right now we'll try to make it validate that. So try to make it fail all the attempts there when the content is too short. Validates content when Okay, and we say minimum of 20 characters. Save that and run our spec one more time. And now it passes, which means that if we try to save our record with content that is less than 20 characters, it will not work. Well, we can try that, because our test already is testing this for us, but we can do it by hand and make sure, if you don't believe me, that it will not work now. So, say post, create content, and before we used, what did we say? And it was okay. Well, we said all of this. Okay, and this looks like it's less than 20 characters. So let's try to use the same content. Okay, it worked. It means that it is more than 19 characters. So maybe I'll just delete that and leave hello world. And hello world is what? 11 characters. So it's definitely less than 20. Oh, and this is exactly the same problem. When I start my console, it will load all the models into the memory. So it ignores all the new lines that we created. So we have to restart our console in order for it to pick up the changes. And you see, this is also not very efficient. Our test is already telling us that the new code is fine. But if we want to test it by hand, we would have to either have some interface on the website, or we have to go to the command line and restart it every single time. So let's restart it and open it again and try to create that post with hello world as content, which is less than 20 characters. Okay, enter. Roll back. So this time it didn't allow us to save the post that would have such a short content. It doesn't work. Before it did work, now it doesn't. And our test already told us that it doesn't work if you try to save it the short content. How about if the post is too long? We want to validate that the post is maximum of 160 characters. Well, we do it exactly the same way. So we go to your test, and let's try that we have this test for it. Describe and content is too long. Do before we will take our post and our content of the post will assign to A times, so first one invalid, so we say the first one invalid would be more than 60, so 61, and that should not be valid. Save and run our spec. And of course it failed because it expected this to be not valid, but it was valid because at the moment the application doesn't care how long the post is, as long as it's more than 19 characters. And we can run this validator, write it again exactly the same way as before. Content oh sorry, not minimum, maximum of 160. Save, run the spec again, and the tests are all passing now. So our validators will ensure that the format of the post when we save it is all correct. If it's not correct, the validators will not allow it to be saved. Alright, so we have our tests in place, so then we can change our code and still be sure that it works because our tests will check it. So I know by fact that we don't have to write it in 3 lines. We can write it all in 1 line, and we don't have to repeat this validate content. Okay, so we can actually write it all in 1 line. So length minimum 20 and maximum of 160. And we can delete those two because they're already here. And now if this code does exactly the same as before, the test should still pass. And if they don't pass, then it means that we made a mistake somewhere. Oh, I can actually see the mistake already. I made a typo in this word, so now the test will not pass. At least 2 of them will not pass for the length. Oh yeah, there is actually a syntax error, and it says that there is no such thing as length validator. So let's fix that typo. Save and run our test one more time. And everything worked this time, which means this new code, all in 1 line instead of 3, is doing exactly the same thing. In programming or test-driven development, well, actually any kind of programming, we call this process refactoring. But in test-driven development, we have the test to make sure that whenever we change our code, everything remains functional, everything works and nothing's broken. Okay, I think that's enough for this video. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to create another model and make those two talk to each other. Thank you very much and see you in the next video.